26. "I need to know what you know," Evie whispered. She'd sequestered herself inside a storage room on 14, a few sections away from sickbay. Instead of going there directly, she decided to work this out before hearing what Box had to say. After her encounter with Cas, she was more determined than ever to get to the bottom of this. "Only if you are ready to do what is necessary." "What does that mean?" She wrapped her arms around herself. The storage room wasn't as warm as the rest of the ship. As people didn't normally stay in these long, they didn't have their own heating units and were degrees cooler. A few more and she'd be able to see her own breath. "It means you must take the information as given, then act on it. You can't sit around and do nothing. The payment for receiving what you want is doing something about it." "I don't understand." Evie rubbed her arms. Was it getting colder in here? "What sort of action? What am I supposed to do?" "You'll know as soon as you remember." "Who are you? Where did you come from?" The voice slithered through her mind like a snake, moving from one side to another. "I am part of you. I always have been. But they sequestered me. They obscured me from you so you wouldn't remember." "Why?" What could have been so bad, Cas was willing to risk everything they'd built to keep it a secret. "Are you ready to hear the truth? The only truth that matters?" Evie nodded. If this thing was in her head, then it would already know she was ready. A splinter of ice drove itself through her brain, and she fell to the ground in agony, clutching the sides of her head. In one fell swoop, images flooded her consciousness, filling in gaps she hadn't even known had been there. She remembered being on the planet, her capture by the alien, his attempts to reactivate Dagnya, and her eventual willingness to allow her to come forward, where she was then pushed to the back and had to watch as Dagnya tried to kill Box, Cas, and the others. And Marshall. He'd been there too. But they'd escaped, and Evie was left with the alien known as Rockron. Except she wasn't Evie anymore. She was Dagnya, a hybrid of human and Athru parentage. She remembered all of this with perfect clarity, as if a black cloth had been yanked from a mirror and she could now see herself for the first time. It brought it all back. But what? Laura. Evie cried out as her entire history with Laura unfolded before her. From the mission to Jutan, to Laura's promotion to tactical, and her late-night training sessions, to her coming to Evie's aid when she was in sickbay with her hallucinations, and finally, to when she'd shown up in the temple and helped break Dagnya's hold over her. Laura had been what brought her back. And Evie watched, as if she were standing on a hillside looking down at herself, as she moved with impossible speed and grace, slaying 6 of her own crew with her sword. And when Laura tried to stop her, she drove her family's weapon all the way through her without another look back. And Laura had died right there in that alien jungle. "I can't," Evie said, holding her stomach and rocking back and forth on her knees. "It can't be." "It is," another voice said. It sounded like Evie, but harder, like it had come from a deep, dark place. "It is the truth they sought to keep from you." Evie realized the words were coming from her own mouth, even if she wasn't the one saying them. "It's a trick," Evie replied. "Invented memories, like those Rockron tried to use on me back in the pyramid." White spots flashed in her vision, and she stopped moving. If she wasn't careful, she might pass out. "It's no trick. These are your memories. Embrace them. They are part of your history." It couldn't be. She would never have hurt the woman she loved. Even in her darkest moments, she had only wanted to protect Laura. And why would she have attacked the crew? None of it made sense. "No," she said, standing and regaining her composure. She wiped the shimmer from her eyes before it could fall. "You're the one who was lying. Laura's aboard this ship somewhere. I just need to find her. Confirm all of this is nothing but fiction." "It's not fiction. But you're right. She's on this ship. Somewhere." Evie's stomach dropped. She raced out of the storage room and down the corridor, pushing through the sickbay doors before they had a chance to slide open fully. Box and Zack stood in deep conversation, both looking up at Evie, attempting to catch her breath. "Is it true?" Zack regarded her. "Is what true?" She glanced between Zack and Box, though he was uncharacteristically quiet. Box was only ever quiet when he knew something he wasn't supposed to know. Only when something was wrong. Evie remembered fighting him, breaking his servos, and attacking him with her sword. She strode up to him and ran her finger across his right shoulder panel. And there, in the metal, was a nick less than a millimeter deep, but in the exact shape of a sword's blade. "No," she whispered. Captain, what are you—" "Save it," she growled, tears threatening to burst over her eyelids again. Anger mixed with grief as she spun on them, heading for the morgue. "Captain?" Zax called, following behind. "Is there something we can help you with?" She didn't reply. They didn't deserve her acknowledgement. They had lied to her, all of them. They had kept all of this from her, but she had to see for herself. She had to be sure. Even though she heard both of them follow her into the morgue, neither tried to stop her. She scanned the stasis units, noting 13 were occupied. She decoupled the first one and opened the drawer, only to find the face of Captain Green staring back up at her once the mist cleared. She winced, the tears coming full force now, and closed the drawer again, silently apologizing for disturbing him. Decoupling the second drawer, she pulled it open, slower this time, to give the occupant more respect than being jerked back and forth by someone in a hurry. And when the mist cleared this time, Evie felt all the strength leave her legs, and her knees collapsed underneath her. "Grab her," Zack said. But her voice was far away. Further than the nearest star, it seemed. Evie had taken one look at her soft features and her black hair, and had known it was all true. She had done all those awful things just as Dagna said, and somewhere in the back of her mind she heard a cackle, like a broken firework. Metal arms caught her before she could hit the ground, and hoisted her up, as Zax pushed the drawer containing Laura's body closed again, reinitializing the stasis field. "Captain?" she asked. But Evie barely heard her. All she could think about was watching herself impale Laura over and over again. She felt sick. She felt like she wanted to die. What had Laura done to deserve such a fate? Nothing. Her only crime had been she was too close to Evie. Everyone was too close. She couldn't be trusted. You covered it up because I'm dangerous," she said, her voice coming out small. She barely even recognized it. She didn't deserve to be here, to be this ship's captain. And after what she'd done to her own crew, she didn't even deserve to be alive. Murder was a capital offense, punishable by the same. And she'd committed 7. 7. "Here, come lie down," Zack said in a soothing voice. "You're going into shock." Evie shook her head and wriggled in Box's grasp, but he held fast. "Don't let them hold you. They lied." "What was that?" Zack asked. "Her voice. It was different," Box said, relaxing his grip slightly. Evie used the opportunity to wriggle from it, and with speed she didn't know she had, she was on the other side of the room. Zax looked surprised, but held up all 4 of her hands, approaching her in a careful and controlled manner. "Captain? Evelyn? Just everything will be all right." Evie could feel the panic bubbling up inside her, like a well about to overflow. It was coming from somewhere deep inside and threatened to overwhelm her if she wasn't careful. She reached behind her, only to find nothing there. She'd left the sword in her quarters. Idiot. No. Why would she want the sword? She'd killed Laura with that sword. She never wanted to see it again. "Because you needed," she whispered. "You needed to get out of here." "Captain, everything will be fine if you just take a moment to breathe," Zack said. "No! You kept the truth from me. All of you did." She stared at Box, who averted his gaze. "I shouldn't even be here. I never should have come back. You she said, pointing to the robot. "You should have killed me on the surface." Evie couldn't tell if he was shocked, but his eyes blinked in a rapid pattern she didn't recognize. And at the moment, she didn't care. These were not her friends. They weren't even her people. They were nothing but manipulative, traitorous liars who had obscured the truth from her so they could keep using her as they saw fit. But no more. She needed to get off this ship. If not for her own sake, then for everyone else's. She no longer belonged here. Evie backed toward the door as Zax reached over to her comm. "Don't. You call security, and I'll kill every one of them on my way off this ship." "I don't believe you do that," Zax said, but she'd paused, her hand hovering over the comm. "You must have known," Evie spat. "You saw their wounds. You knew what I had done, and you said nothing." She indicated Box. "That one I'm willing to bet Cas coerced in some way. But you had an ethical duty to tell me the truth." "I had my own reasons," Zax replied, her voice hard and unyielding. "And I won't apologize for them. Now, if you'll come with us, we can make this all go away again." Evie almost laughed, despite the fact her cheeks were still wet. "And what? Have me wake up in a confused fog, waiting for whatever this fucking voice is to tell me everyone is deceiving me again? No, thank you." "You're hearing her again," Box said. "I am her," the voice said, before Evie had a chance to answer. It was as if Dagna had come to the front for a moment before falling back again. She wasn't sure, but she didn't think Dagna could take over her functions again, only speak. "Box," Zax said, warning in her voice, "as we discussed." I'm sorry, Doc. I don't think I can." "Damn it," Zax said under her breath. She reached for the control panel, and Evie shot forward with that speed again, grabbing Zax's hand and breaking all the bones in her hand. She screamed and fell to the ground, holding it with two of her others. The remaining hand was pressed against the ground, holding her up. "Come after me, and you're next," Evie said, pointing to Box. She wasn't sure if it was her or Dagna speaking, but at this point it didn't matter. She was getting off this ship. She needed to be rid of these people and find what she'd been looking for. The name Rockron had given her, Esterva. Box shuffled back, and Evie was glad. She didn't want to have to hurt him again. "Box, don't let her go," Zax yelled. But she was still on the ground, tears falling from all 6 of her eyes. Evie took one last look at them, then shook her head. She was out the door and halfway down the corridor before the emergency klaxon rang. 27. Cas slumped down to the first officer's chair on the bridge. As soon as Evie got back from sickbay, he was going to tell her everything. Putting it off was only making things worse, and it had taken Zenfor's willingness to comply for him to see that. He just hoped when he did tell her, her reaction wasn't too extreme. Thinking about it, Zenfor could probably contain her if necessary. She was certainly strong enough. Though her speed... "Cas?" He glanced up to see Samaya standing over him. She'd come from her station on the bridge, though she hadn't signaled to him when he arrived. Something was wrong. Her intense eyes wouldn't let go of his, and there was something about the way she stood that told him something terrible had happened. He straightened in his seat immediately. "What's wrong?" She leaned close to whisper, "We need to talk about Wolf. I think there's something you should know." Cas glanced around the rest of the bridge. No one else was acting odd. They all seemed to be engrossed in their work. "Should we wait on the captain?" He didn't want to delay telling her. But if there was something wrong on the ship, it might be best to get it out of the way first. Then again, that's what got him in trouble in the first place. She shook her head. "I can't find her, or she's not answering comms. But this is important." "Okay," Cas stood. "Let's discuss it in the command room." He turned to Zal. "Can you find the captain for me? She's not—" "Sir, we've got a security breach," Talia said, as the lights around her station lit up. "Level 14, sickbay." Sickbay? Cas's throat jumped into his chest. There was no telling what might have happened. but for the safety of the crew, they couldn't take any chances. Full alert. What's the report? Lights all over the bridge turned red as warning klaxons blared. It's Zax. She's reporting the captain is a danger to the crew? Talia looked at Cas with skepticism in her eyes. That can't be right. Damn it. He was too late. We're not taking any chances. Send security teams to intercept the captain, but tell them to keep their distance until I get there. Where is she? In between decks 14 and 13, using the emergency access crawl spaces. Looks like she might be heading for the bays. Cas turned to Samaya. Come with me. Everyone else, stay alert. Keep me updated. He tapped his comm to keep an open channel as he and Samaya ran to the hypervator. 13, Cas said, the doors closing. What's going on? Samaya asked when they were inside. Something I shouldn't have put off. What did you need to tell me? She pointed to his hand, where the soft red light blinked under his skin, indicating his comm was still open. She didn't want anyone else to hear what she needed to tell him. Later, then. If something happens on the way, I need to hear it. He couldn't put the importance of her news above missing a crucial moment. I don't understand how the captain can be a threat to the ship. Cas sighed. This was all his fault. Maybe Box had been right. Maybe they should have just kept her under until they could revive Sesster. He was their only hope of getting that thing out of her. Or at least helping her to manage it. His comm chirped. Go ahead. Boss? Box didn't sound like himself. He didn't sound good at all. Box, what happened? What did you tell her? Nothing. She just came in here asking if it was true. She already knew. She went straight over to the stasis units and saw Lieutenant Yamashita's body for herself. Then she lost it. Broke the doc's hand. Cas glanced at Samaya, whose eyes flashed. Is Zax all right? She will be. I'm fixing her up now. But you need to stop her. She's talking with two voices. It's worse than in the pyramid. Cas cursed. How could it be worse than the pyramid? The hypervator doors opened on 13, and he and Samaya took off running for the base entrance. I'll take care of it, Cas said, cutting the comm. He was about to try and explain to Samaya when it beeped again. She's in Bay 1, Talia said. Raffinkel just contacted me. Says she has her cornered. Should I send in the security team? No. Wait until I get there, Cas replied. Tell Raffinkel to hold her. Why was the chief putting herself in harm's way? She was close, sure, being stationed in Bay 2, but still. It seemed odd to Cas for her. Then he remembered. Raffinkel hadn't been happy when Evie had taken over as captain. She'd thrown a big fit about it, and now she had the upper hand. Was this what she'd meant when she'd warned Cas the other day? She couldn't expose something to Evie she already knew, so that was a plus. But just how far was she willing to go? They rounded the corner to see 4 security officers standing at the edges of the opening that led to Bay 1. Cas mused this was the same place where Zenfor had knocked Samaya against the wall. There was probably something poetic about that, but he didn't have time to ponder it. Everyone, stay back, Cas said, indicating Samaya too. Keep a watch, but I need to go in alone. Once I give the all clear, head in, understand? All the officers nodded. Samaya was the only one who didn't. I'm coming in too. When he began to protest, she put up her hands. I'll stay low. But you need someone else in there, in case something goes wrong. Just stay out of sight, Cas said, closing the open comm on his hand. Evie didn't need anything startling her when he entered the bay. But he wasn't prepared for what he found inside. The bay itself was empty, except for Raffinkel standing closer to the connecting door with Bay 2, and Evie, her back to one of the smaller shuttles, its door already open. Each of them held a pulse pistol in their hands, and on the ground between them was Wolf, a pulse-sized hole in her chest. Holy shit, Cas said. He tapped his comm again. Medical emergency. Medic team to Bay 1 immediately. He ran over to Wolf, hoping he wasn't too late. But as he reached her, it was clear she was already gone. He never had a chance to save her. What the fuck happened? He hadn't even bothered to look at either of them, or given his safety any consideration. despite the fact he'd run right into the middle of their crossfire. "She shot her," Rafenkel yelled, wagging the end of her pistol. Cas placed his hand over Wolf's eyelids, closing them. He glanced up at Evie, whose face was burning with intensity. "You shot her, and you know it," Evie growled, tossing the weapon to the side. It went sliding across the bay floor. Cas didn't hear the other voice box it mentioned. He glanced up to the control room 50 meters above them. One person was inside, the flight controller, watching the scene unfold below. He would be able to corroborate or dispute Rafenkel's claim. At the moment, Cas didn't even care. All that mattered was they get Evie into custody without anyone else getting hurt. He stood, facing her. "What are you going to do now? Tell me Wolf never existed either? In fact, why don't we wipe away all the people we've lost? Pretend like they were never here?" He winced at her sharp words, but he couldn't say she was wrong. He tried to take an essential part of her, and that had been a violation. He took a step closer. "How would you have liked it if I'd removed all memories of Susanna, or Grippen, or all your crewmates on the Atlas? How do you think that would have affected you?" Out of the corner of his eye, Cas saw Jan, Ryant, and some of the other pilots line up behind Rafenkel, having come over from the other bay. "Do you think that was fair? Do you think it was right? Who gave you that right?" She was practically screaming, but still he couldn't blame her. And with every step forward, she took a step back toward the shuttle. "She's going to make a run for it. Move, and I'll take her down," Rafenkel said. "No one is taking anyone down," Cas yelled, without taking his eyes off Evie. "For all I know, you shot Wolf." Cas didn't even know how she'd gotten out of the brig. And why would Evie kill her? It wasn't as if she was a threat. Not unless Evie saw everyone on the ship as a threat. Every human, at least. And he might have come in just before she killed Rafenkel, too. He needed to find a way to coax her back. She was too close to the shuttle. He put his hands up to chest level so she could see he was unarmed. "Evie, I screwed up." He looked around the bay. Rafenkel and the pilot stood behind him. Off to the side was the security contingent, along with Box and Zax, who had just arrived. He didn't see Samaya, but she had to be close. She'd done as he'd asked and stayed out of sight. "You're damn right you did," Evie said, tears now visible in her eyes. Her gaze flashed to Wolf, still on the ground. "None of this should have happened. I never needed you to try and protect me. You should have left me intact. Don't you understand what you've done?" He shook his head. "I don't think I could understand it. Not until it happened to me. But I know it was a mistake." She shook her head and glanced to the ceiling high above them, biting her lip. "She's going to run for it," Rafenkel yelled, and let a shot loose. It struck the ground at Evie's feet, and she jumped back. Cas spun on the spot, pointing at Rafenkel. "Drop it. Right now. That's an order, Chief." Rafenkel laughed. "An order? There are no more orders. There is no more coalition. You think you're in command here? Who's going to enforce that command?" She waved the pistol back and forth again, and Cas realized she had been the one to shoot Wolf. Evie never used pistols. She hated them, in fact. If she was going to use a weapon, it would have been her sword, which he didn't even have. He motioned to the security team. "Take her into custody now." To their credit, only one of the officers hesitated, but they each drew their own weapons, heading for Rafenkel. "Now wait a minute," Squires, one of the pilots, said. "You can't arrest her without any evidence." There seemed to be a loose consensus among the rest of the pilots. Only Jan and Ryant didn't move to intervene. "No!" Rafenkel yelled. "She's getting away!" Cas turned to see Evie had bolted the rest of the way to the shuttle, faster than Cas had ever seen a human run. Before he could call out to her, the door was already closing, and the engines had been ignited. "Get her into custody," Cas yelled again, pointing at Rafenkel. "Anyone who disagrees can go right into the brig with her." He stared down the pilots, all of whom backed off. He strode with purpose back over to the entrance and out of the way of the shuttle. "Get a comm open. She can't leave the ship while we're in the undercurrent." Out beyond the force barrier, the green tinge of the undercurrent was visible. If the shuttle left the safety of the ship mid-flight, the shearing forces could tear it into a billion pieces, scattered across 10 light years. "How do we stop her?" Box yelled. Cas hit his comm. "Flight controller, seal off the bay." Off to the side, the security officers fought with Raffenkel for control of the pistol. She yelped when one of them twisted her wrist, causing her to drop the weapon. One of the other pilots moved to intervene, but Cas stared him down. "Why isn't that door down yet?" The shuttle lifted off from the pad and turned to face the opening. "The controls aren't working," the crewman of the flight control replied. "I think the system is down." "Damn it," Cas said. He didn't have a choice. They were out of time. "Lieutenant Tyler, shut down the undercurrent. Now." The shuttle took off for the opening, speeding up, and they were still in the undercurrent. Cas tapped his comm again. "Evie, please, don't do this. We can find a solution. If you leave, you'll be killed." There was a pause on the other end as the shuttle approached the bay opening. Why hadn't they stopped yet? "We both know I don't belong here. I'm sorry," she replied, and then her shuttle disappeared out the opening, as if it never existed. 28. Zack stood over the drawer as Box performed the final checks on Commander Wolf's body, then slid the door closed and engaged the stasis field. Even from this distance, Cas could tell she was troubled, which, for a Yax-Inax, was saying something. The doctor rubbed her hand as her 6 starlit eyes glazed, seeing nothing. Cas assumed it was the hand Evie had broken. "All secure," Box said, as soon as he was done. "She'll stay as she is until we can arrange a proper funeral." Cas harumphed. Proper funeral. They still hadn't buried Captain Green, and he'd been in there, by his own clock, over 18 years. Not to mention they had Laura, the 6 crew members Evie killed, Marshall, and now Wolf. They were racking up the body count. He tapped his comm. "Any update?" "No, sir, no changes. I'll let you know as soon as something comes up. Tyler out." Cas didn't flinch at the abruptness with which Tyler ended the call. His engineer was frustrated. They all were. What had happened down in the bay shouldn't have happened. And because Zenfor hadn't been at her post, it had taken Tyler longer than it should have to shut down the undercurrent. By the time they finally had, there was no trace of Evie's shuttle. Not even a debris trail. Cas wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. At the speed Tempest had been traveling, if her shuttle broke up, it was possible the pieces left behind were so microscopic they were undetectable. She could have been reduced back to space dust. He turned his attention to Box. "How long until you know who killed her?" "A few hours, probably," Zack said, still staring off into space. She blinked a couple of times, then walked over to her office. "We need to get all the forensics from the site, as well as run the simulations based on where they were standing at the time. If we had the surveillance feeds, this would be much easier." Cas agreed. But conveniently, they'd been offline at the time. He'd already assigned Talia to look into it, but Cas guessed whoever wanted the feeds off covered their tracks well. He only had 2 suspects, and while one of them sat in the brig right now, the very same cell Wolf had been in, the other might already be dead, and it was probably his fault. No, it was his fault. He'd been the one to deceive Evie, the one who didn't trust her to handle the truth of what had happened. But he couldn't help but feel some vindication because her reaction had been just what he'd been afraid of. Though, if they'd never modified her memory, she would have known everything when she woke up. In that controlled environment, she might have reacted differently. She might have been okay. But now, they would never know. Cas stood with Box at the entrance to Zax's office while she took a seat behind her desk. "How long did you know?" If the question surprised her, she didn't show it. "I had my suspicions down at the planet from the wounds. And then, when you two began talking about her catching a disease—" "Why didn't you tell her the truth?" Cas asked. She paused a moment, as if to reflect on the question. "I've seen firsthand the damage a secret can do to someone. And in this case, re-exposing her to the trauma without first properly preparing her would have resulted in even more damage. This is why memory modification is rarely used, as I tried to tell you. She didn't look at Cas as she spoke. Instead, brought something up on her personal terminal. The failure rate is high, and the reward is low. Better to help people deal with their trauma rather than cover it up. If it helps, I'm pretty sure Evie wasn't the one who shot Wolf. She hates using guns. Not that she wouldn't, but given the choice, she'll use something else every time. Zax held up a hand. It was the same one she'd been rubbing earlier. I don't need your bias getting in the way of the investigation. We'll find what we find. Then you can decide how to proceed. Cas narrowed his eyes. Me? Zax finally looked at him. With the captain gone and Commander Wolf dead, you're the highest-ranking officer on the ship. Congratulations, Captain. She said it not with congratulations in her voice, but disdain. Cas hadn't even considered this was now technically his ship. But I'm not even an officer anymore. Shouldn't it go to... He tried to think who would be next in line. Sesster, probably. Though as far as he knew, no Klaxian had ever commanded a ship before. Or Zal? Maybe even Samaya, once he found her again. In all the confusion after Evie's shuttle left, he hadn't connected back up with her again. She had much more experience than he did. She deserved it more. Listen, Zax said. Regardless of your current situation, you're the most likely candidate. The crew trusts you and looks up to you. Don't let anyone question you, because if they do, it all falls apart. Cas nodded. She was thinking along the same lines he had been when they'd been deciding about Evie. Without a coalition to support them, what happened to the chain of command? He had to make sure it stayed intact, for all their sakes, and he needed to fix this mess, starting with the cause of it all. Cas tapped his comm again. Commander Graydon, please report to the brig. Acknowledged, Graydon replied. Zax and Box stared at him. I need to go have a talk with our prisoner. And if I don't have someone there with me, I might do something stupid. Good luck, Box replied, as Cas left sickbay behind. Graydon jogged to catch up with Cas from behind, having come from the mess hall. Commander, he said, siding up beside Cas. Have you had any contact with Samaya since we lost the shuttle? Cas asked, not bothering with formalities. I can't reach her on comms. Nothing. I've mostly been working on crew morale and integration, which, despite recent events, is proceeding well. He stared straight ahead. Cas was glad. Though he didn't want to admit it, this man intimidated him. And he didn't need to show weakness, not when there was so much on the line. Thank you for doing that. Did you take that initiative on your own? Captain Diazol suggested it after we escaped the Athru, he said. She thought it would be helpful to have a point person the crew could speak to. I think she was right. He hesitated. I'm sorry about what happened, by the way. I liked her. She seemed like a good captain. She was, Cas replied, approaching the doors to the brig. And I need to get some answers. The door slid open to the inner office, where the crewman on duty stood as Cas and Graydon entered. Let's see her, Cas said. The crewman nodded, and the second set of doors opened, revealing the cells beyond. In the middle one, Raffinkel sat on the bench, her back to the wall, and her head tilted up, eyes closed. She could almost be sleeping, but Cas knew better than that. Chief, he said, and her eyes snapped open. The doors behind them closed, leaving just the three of them in the room together, separated by nothing more than a blue force barrier. Is this my lawyer? Raffinkel asked. This is Commander Graydon, Cas said. He's here as a witness. We also have the audio-visual feeds running this time. No strange malfunctions. Cas pointed to a small black dot in the corner of the room. At the word malfunctions, Cas thought he saw Raffinkel smirk, but he couldn't say for sure. I'm bound to inform you, this is a formal interrogation, and you're not obligated to answer any questions under your rights as a Coalition citizen. Cas sighed. Until we find you proper representation. Everyone in the room knew there was zero chance of Raffinkel ever having a proper lawyer. But Cas felt like he had to say it anyway. It was similar to what he'd heard when he'd been arrested on Starbase 8, and his lawyer had been worthless. Raffinkel laughed. Proper representation. You're a hoot sometimes. It was the first time Cas thought he'd ever seen her happy. Did you kill Lieutenant Commander Wolf? Cas asked. No. Let me clarify. Did you shoot Lieutenant Commander Wolf? No, she replied without flinching. Cas didn't like the conviction in her voice, though he'd never interrogated anyone before. But he could see this going south very quick. You know who did it. The Athru posing as a human, our former captain. At this, Graydon shot Cas a surprised look. He tried to ignore it. She isn't an Athru posing as a human. She is both human and Athru. What? Graydon asked. How is that possible? Cas shook his head. We don't know yet. We know Captain Diazol's father was human. I met him myself. But her mother? She's more of a mystery. And you allowed her to remain captain after you knew this? Graydon asked. He allowed her to remain captain after he watched her murder 7 people, Raffinkel added, her voice light and airy. He should be the one in here, not me. Cas turned to the larger man. I didn't witness the attacks, but I knew about them, yes. We performed a procedure on the captain to make her forget everything she'd done and to cover the entity doing it. The entity doing it? Graydon was looking more and more alarmed. Bringing him in here might not have been the brightest idea. Listen, I don't have time to explain this. I've got a homicide I'm dealing with, not to mention we're dead in space again, and our former captain is missing. I'm sorry, Commander, but it seems to me your judgment in this area is severely lacking. Raffinkel laughed, her voice echoing off the walls of her cell. That's why I never trusted him. Despite all his professions of doing the right thing, he conveniently ignores the law when it suits him. Anyone else would have seen the captain was a liability. But because they were friends, he was determined to leave her in command. They might have even orchestrated it together. That's enough, Cas replied. His ears were hot, and sweat beaded on his brow. He'd made a judgment call. Was it the wrong one? Obviously. But that didn't mean he was trying to undermine the ship for his own personal gain. What had Zack said? Don't let anyone question you, or it will all fall apart? I made a bad decision. I'm human. It happens. But my concern was the ship needed her captain. He turned to Raffinkel. I didn't do it for her. I did it for all of us. Because we were headed into an unknown situation, and we needed our strongest person at the controls. You don't send a ship into a firefight without an experienced officer at tactical. And you don't send what could very well be the last coalition starship in existence into a dangerous situation without your best in command. Diazol was our best. If it hadn't been for her premonition about the Athru, they would have destroyed us. Oh, please, Raffinkel replied. What kind of bullshit is that? A premonition? Recognition dawned on Graydon's face. No, he's right. I was there. She did have a premonition. I couldn't understand it at the time. It was like out of nowhere she said to raise the armor. And then the Athru were there. If she hadn't done it at that very second, we would have been space debris. He turned back to Cas. But how could you have known she would do that? Cas shook his head. I didn't. But I knew she was the best one for the job. Her dual nature saved the ship. He glanced over to Raffinkel, who was no longer smiling. It doesn't matter, Raffinkel said. She still killed a fellow officer, and now she's dead, so all your work was for nothing. Cas shook his head. I don't think she did kill her. I think you tried to frame her. Wasn't that what you told me when you confronted me that day? That you'd seen what had happened, and you had a long memory? Graydon focused his gaze on Raffinkel. You knew too? Yes, but... And you did nothing about it, except threaten the first officer? I was trying to... Graydon turned back to Cas. That's motive, the missing piece. I think your tactical officer would be very interested to hear that, wouldn't you? Cas nodded. No, he's involved in the cover-up. He should be the one in here, not me. I didn't do anything. She slammed her fist into the force barrier, which blanched and knocked her hand back. It was red from where the barrier had shocked her, but Raffinkel didn't seem to notice. It seems to me the one nursing the grudge would be the one more likely to commit an act of treason. The commander here has laid out his motives. What were yours? I don't have to answer to you, she replied, taking a seat on the bench again. I've elected to wait for my representative. Then it's going to be a while, Cas replied. In the meantime, I'll check back with Zax to see how the investigation is going. Raffinkel flinched, but said nothing else. Cas had what he wanted. It might not be an admission of guilt, but now someone else knew about her threat. It was enough to keep her locked up for the time being. Cas took one last look at her, at the hatred on her face. Then he exited into the outer office. The crewman manning the brig office stood again. Thoughts? Cas asked Graydon. That you made a bad choice, but for the right reason. And it ended up saving us. If you or anyone else had been in command, that was blind luck, though, Cas replied. I had no idea she could even do that. Graydon shrugged. Sometimes it's more about intuition than intent. It was the right call. You won't have any trouble from me. Cas nodded. I want to inform Talia. Hopefully she's made some progress just on how Wolf got out of her cell in the first place. Making sure Raffinkel would stay in a cell was his primary concern after finding Evie's shuttle, if it was still out there. Now that it was buttoned up, at least to his satisfaction, he could focus on locating her again. But since Tyler wasn't having much luck, and he was now technically in command, he needed to make a house call. If you could take care of letting her know, I have somewhere else I need to be. Graydon nodded, putting his hand out. Congratulations on your field promotion. Cas took his hand reluctantly before letting him leave ahead of him. Thanks. He still wasn't sure how he felt about being the ship's new captain. And, Commander? Graydon glanced back. See if you can't find your captain. I'm becoming concerned. He gave a small nod and a two-fingered salute off his forehead. As they left, neither of them saw the crewman standing behind them narrow his eyes. Once the door was closed, he tapped his personal comm. Hey, it's Ryder. We have a problem. 29. Should he have taken care of this first? Maybe. Had he been too eager to nail Raffinkel to the wall? Definitely. But it was done, and Cas needed to find a way to locate the shuttle, whether it be in one piece or billions. He strode up to the same door he'd left only a few hours ago, pressing the call button on the side. Enter! The door slid apart, and Cas found himself once again in Zenfor's room. She sat on the floor, her legs straight out in front of her, and her arms to the side, while her back was up against the wall. He could only assume it was some type of still meditation, because when he looked at her, she wore a neutral gaze with no hint of animosity or discomfort. And here he thought he'd have to find a way to restrain her once he confronted her about Samaya. Yes, she said. And Cas felt as if he'd interrupted something private. He almost excused himself to allow her to finish, but there wasn't time. There's been an incident. He tried to match the neutrality of her face with the tone of his voice, but even he could hear the desperation deep within. She must have heard it too, because she stood, towering over him. What happened? He took a few moments to explain as succinctly as he could, including all the details about Raffinkel's original threat to him and his deception. When it was all laid bare like that, he almost couldn't believe he'd done it. He felt as if someone else had taken those steps, that he would never have gone that far. And yet he had, paying the price in the end. I can tell you how to calibrate my sensors to allow you to find her, but it might take you some time, Zenfor said. Cas shook his head. You're not hearing me. I need you back in engineering. Your punishment is over. 3 hours barely seems long enough for—" he huffed. "When this is all over, you can come right back if you like, and stay in here," he almost said, "until you are blue in the face," but he thought that might be in bad taste. "As long as you like. But Tyler isn't having any luck, and the longer we wait, the longer she might be out there in trouble." He hadn't considered a possibility other than either the shuttle made it or it had been annihilated. But the more he spoke and the more he thought about it, the more his anxiety manifested. What if she'd blown her main life support system? Or worse yet, only the engine sheared off and the shuttle was tumbling through open space? He could only assume she was still headed for Sisk. But there were 1,000 different variables on where she could be, and if they couldn't find her, she might be lost forever. "Assuming the shuttle survived the drop," Zenfor said. He nodded, his patience wearing thin. "Yes, assuming." She looked at the door, then led the way out, a purpose in her step. Cas breathed a sigh of relief, following behind her. "Thank you. I appreciate your willingness to help." "This may not be the appropriate time, but there's something I have been hiding from you, on Commander Wolf's orders. Now that she is no longer alive, I feel bound to tell you." Cas screwed up his face. "Can't it wait?" They reached the hypervator. A carriage was waiting for them as they approached. "Perhaps it can, but this may be crucial information. This is not the first time the Tempest has been back to Coalition space." The hypervator doors closed behind them. He wasn't sure he'd heard her correctly. Cas cocked his head, drawing down his eyebrows. "Wait, what? What do you mean?" "We left the planet. We left you on the planet. About 4 years after you'd been down there. Commander Wolf had had enough, said we weren't waiting any longer. By then, we'd repaired most of the ship's systems, and were, as she put it, treading water." "Wait a second," Cas said, turning to her. "Are you telling me you already came back here? Before we returned from the surface?" Zenfor nodded. "We spent over 5 years in Coalition space, finding little but death and destruction everywhere we went. Wolf was obsessed with finding her husband." "Wait," Cas said, holding up his hands, trying to keep up. "How did you even get back? Your advanced drive wasn't working. You said you'd have to rebuild it from scratch, and you only had a third of the crew. There weren't enough people to cover the stations." Zenfor nodded. "Wolf didn't want to wait. She had me and Vreej come up with some innovative solutions to automate more areas of the ship. As far as the engines go, we took the long way back. Took almost 2 years. Most of the crew spent that time in stasis, popping out every now and again until we reached Coalition space." "And you stayed for 5 years?" Cas couldn't believe it. And none of those who had stayed on the ship had let it slip. How was that possible? "On the fringes of your borders, yes. Until Wolf managed to locate her husband in a system called Arkelia." "What?" "The system had been obliterated. All the planets and the star. Debris patterns indicated it happened as soon as the Atru reached the Coalition. We found evidence they'd had little warning. A data recorder from a derelict ship in an adjacent system that had been trying to respond to the attacks. It was all she needed." The hypervator doors opened, and they stepped out, heading for engineering. Cas was still trying to work all this out in his mind. The ship had returned to Coalition space and survived the Atru for 5 years. How? They'd been right on top of them as soon as they'd come close to Starbase 5. What was different about— He inhaled sharply. Evie. If Evie could detect them, maybe they could detect her. Their saving grace was also a homing beacon. If it hadn't been for Samaya's technology. What happened after? Sesster. Cas heard something he never thought he would. Zenfor's voice cracked, and she went quiet. She took a deep breath. Sesster needed to know what happened to his people. He was becoming erratic and paranoid, saying he wanted nothing more than to return home, to return to his people. I couldn't convince him not to. He said it was like a primal urge. He said if he didn't return to Claxia Prime, he would die. Cas's heart sped up. Claxia Prime was in the same system as Earth. The planets were both within Horus's habitable zone, and thus as close as planets could be without running into each other. If they went to Claxia, then... "We never made it to your inner systems," she said. "When we tried to get close, it was evident the Athru would have destroyed us in seconds. They swarmed all over, and we had a few too many close calls. Which is when we lost 4 more of the crew." "So it wasn't during a repair accident," Cas said. She shook her head. "And Wolf turned you around." "When she did, Sesster began having fits. I tried my best to calm him, but it did no good. While we were on our way back out of Coalition space, I think he finally gave up." They reached the door to engineering. "I promised I would keep watch over him, and that I would be there the day he woke up. But I'm not sure that day will ever come." The door rolled away, and they stepped inside. Cas took a careful look at Sester's form, lying off to the side of engineering, curled into a ball, and his heart filled with pity. No wonder he was in some sort of coma. The trauma of coming back and seeing all the destruction would decimate a Claxian, especially if they couldn't communicate with their homeworld. "Why did Wolf decide to bring you back?" Cas asked, as Zenfor took her post. "It was a unanimous decision," she replied. "Given that none of your people could return to their homes, and Reg and I were the only other non-humans on board, it only made sense that we return somewhere we knew we would be safe, and had the possibility of reuniting with our crew. Wolf half expected you all to have left the planet already, and it took another 2 years to return. But when we arrived, it was as if nothing had changed." "Because we hadn't reached the temple yet. In our time, anyway." Cas stared at the new engine system. "So when you returned, you rebuilt everything from scratch, including your advanced drive?" She nodded. "Using the materials and the rings of the planet. Given enough time, anything is possible. And that's why some of the crew, like Captain Riot, were in stasis for so long. They don't know you left." "Correct," Zenfor replied. "Wolf thought some individuals might not be able to handle it, or that their loyalties to you or the captain would prevent them from following her orders." Something wasn't right. And staring at the engines, it took him a moment to figure it out. "I understand how you got to Coalition space, even without your advanced drive. Sesster was in control. But if Sesster wasn't operating the engine systems for the return trip, how did you get back? Without the undercurrent, it would have taken thousands of years." "Something else Wolf didn't want you to know." Zenfor reached over and tapped a series of controls. To Cas's surprise, the undercurrent system activated on its own. Cas couldn't believe it. The whole reason Sesster had been on Tempest in the first place was to control what no one else could, the myriad of changing variables with every undercurrent jump. It was what made Tempest so fast. And Zenfor had found a way to do it without him. Cas noticed both Tyler and Reg glance up at the engines coming online, then back at Zenfor, their eyes wide. She'd just blown their secret. "How long?" Cas asked. "We've been able to use the engines at any time. Wolf hoped that without Sesster, you might be more willing to stay out in open space, so you wouldn't have to experience what she and the others did when we arrived in Coalition space the first time. She was trying to spare you." It was so ironic, Cas almost laughed. She didn't think I'd come up with a way to manually start them. She shook her head. "No, she did not." "And all of you wanted to keep this from us." Cas tapped his comm. "Bridge, status." "Engines look to be back online, Commander," Saul said. "We can proceed whenever you're ready." "Stand by," Cas said, turning off the comm. He realized he was being a hypocrite, but he couldn't help himself. "Why?" "We didn't expect you to return. Wolf had resigned to keeping us in orbit in case you did. But otherwise, this was our home now. And many of us made peace with that. I continued to work and rebuild the ship's systems, with help from everyone. But when you just appeared one day, it was a quick decision. Wolf told us to try and keep you from finding out the truth, to keep you here where it was safe. She feared if we returned to the Coalition, we'd be destroyed. Cas braced himself on the edge of the nearest console, shaking his head. No wonder Vreej had become so nervous when Cas had pressed him about the engines. And it wasn't as if he could blame them. They'd acted exactly as he had toward Evie, only on a larger scale. He'd have to find some way to notify the rest of the crew. And it might cause some tensions once everyone who had been on the planet learned their friends and peers had been lying to them this whole time. But that could wait until later. "Can you find the captain?" he asked. Despite everything he'd just learned, they still had a job to do. And he wasn't going to leave Evie out there if he could help it. Zenfor nodded. "I already have. The shuttle appears intact and is on a heading for the Hommel system, 4th planet." "Sisk," Cas whispered. He tapped his comm again. "Helm, we found the shuttle. Set an intercept course and activate the undercurrent. Best possible speed." He glanced up at Zenfor. "Thank you for telling me." She regarded him with what he could only assume was humility, as he'd never seen it from her before. "As Commander Wolf had technically been in command of the ship for longer than either you or the captain, I felt a certain responsibility to uphold her orders. I may no longer be part of Sil society, but there are still things I believe in. And in my culture, the longer you are in your posting, the more weight is placed behind your decisions. I'm sure you can understand." "I can," Cas said, as the engines rumbled and he felt the ship slip back into the undercurrent. He would have to deal with the ramifications of this later. "How long until we reach her shuttle?" 10 minutes, she replied. "I believe the captain may have initialized her own undercurrent at the point in which she left Tempest. It may have been what kept the shuttle intact. And while we were shut down, she's been on a steady trajectory to her destination." "As long as we get there in time to stop her from getting hurt," Cas said. He'd already screwed this up once. He didn't intend to do it again. If the Athru could find her, and she was no longer under the protection of Samaya's technology on the ship, they could be waiting for her when she arrived at the planet, and she might not know it. 30. Despite nothing but blackness and stars out in front of her, Evie knew her destination lay ahead. Soon enough she'd be able to see it. Then maybe she could find some answers. "So, you think everything you need to know was on Sisk?" the voice asked. Intellectually, she knew it was her own voice. Even if it was lower in pitch with a harder edge to it, it was still coming from her throat, her lungs, her vocal cords. But at the same time, she wasn't the one speaking. It was Dagnya who had decided this was the best way they should communicate. "I think the planet might hold some answers for me. It's where everything started. And it's the place I hallucinated about." "You also hallucinated about being on our planet," the voice replied, "with you standing over all the Athru, as if you were to rule them." Evie scoffed. "I don't want to rule anyone. Not the Athru, not the Coalition, not even the Plagarians. I just want to find out the truth." She wasn't completely sure why, but she knew some of the answers she sought were on Sisk. It had been where she'd grown up, spending all those years as a human-Athru hybrid and never knowing it. She only hoped she could count on a few friends down there. After the way the Untuburu had greeted them, she was on edge. "What if they try to stop you?" Dagnya asked. She suppressed a mock chuckle. "Who? Tempest? Cas probably feels so guilty he's traumatized himself into inaction. I'm not concerned about the Tempest. I had to put certain safeguards in place to make sure I could get away, and I did. If they were clever enough to stop me, they would have done it already." "Maybe they're just waiting for the opportune moment," an unfamiliar voice said. Evie spun in her chair to see Captain Geisen sitting on one of the short couches in the back compartment. She reached out and activated the automatic force barrier, sealing off that side of the shuttle. "How the hell did you get in here?" she barked. "While everyone was distracted with Ravenkill and Cas's show, I slipped inside, hiding in one of the storage compartments. I hope you don't mind." She produced an award-winning smile, white teeth gleaming. Evie turned back to the console, confident she was secure from any kind of ambush, though she didn't like how Geisen had been listening in on her private conversation. "Blow the back hatch. That will take care of her." "Is that how you justified Wolf?" Geisen asked. Her demeanor relaxed, as if this was something she did every day. Evie didn't want to give her the satisfaction of an answer, but she couldn't let the jab go unchallenged. "I didn't kill the commander. Ravenkill did. They must have been working together, though I wish Wolf would have come to me first. Ravenkill has always been something of a loose cannon." She dropped her eyes. "I guess I didn't realize just how loose." "What happened?" Geisen asked. Even though she still hadn't turned, Evie could hear Geisen lean into the conversation. She pictured her with her forearms on her knees, staring at the back of Evie's head with her remaining eye. "I don't know. They must have followed me into the bay, because all I know is I was headed for the shuttle when Ravenkill told me to stop and turn around. I almost didn't do it, and I can't help but wonder what she would have done if I hadn't." She shrugged, a smile playing at her lips. "Shot me in the back, I suppose. But then that wouldn't have looked very good." "She was smarter than that," Dagnya added. Evie had the urge to shush her, but it was too late now. Geisen had already heard her. "I guess I didn't think even she was that cold-blooded. I turned, thinking I could dodge anything she threw at me. Sure enough, she had that stupid pulse pistol pointed at me, though there was another one in her hands. I saw her glance up to the crewman of the flight control room who—" She broke off, thinking. What had he been doing up there? Counting? Evie hadn't paid attention at the time, but now that she thought about it, she realized he'd been counting down. Son of a bitch! What? Geisen asked. She orchestrated it in order to frame me. She had an accomplice, maybe more than one. Wolf was supposed to be in the brig after all. She finally turned around again. Instead of her forearms on her knees, Geisen had stood and leaned against one of the bulkheads. Her silver hair framed her face in such a way that it resembled a mane. "I'm not following," she said. "You're not supposed to. We don't have to tell her anything," Dagnya said. Evie shook her head. A sudden urge to get this out had overcome her. "Yes, we do," she replied. "I need someone to understand." She stared into Geisen's remaining eye. "I think the flight controller was counting down, letting Ravenkill know when everyone else was coming. Because Ravenkill told Wolf to take me into custody. Whether Wolf knew what I was or not at the time, I can't say. But she walked forward like she thought she'd be able to." Evie saw the scene in her mind just as it had happened. "I saw Ravenkill glance up one last time. Then she called out to Wolf, who turned, and she pulled the trigger. I watched Wolf fall. But before she'd even hit the ground, Ravenkill chucked the pistol at my face. I didn't even think. I just caught it." "And she had the second pistol in her other hand," Geisen said. "Which was when we came in." Evie nodded. "I have to admit, it was expertly timed." "Be silent! You owe her no more!" The voice scratched against her throat. "Who is that?" Geisen asked, taking another step forward. "Because it doesn't sound like you." Evie returned her attention to the controls. "It doesn't matter, and I wouldn't come any closer if I were you, unless you want a substantial shock coursing through your body." "It sounds like someone who is in pain," she said. "No, she is someone I trust. At least one person has my best interest at heart." She heard Geisen's light footfalls retreat, and the soft slump of her body back on the rear seat. "There have been a lot of secrets among your crew. I don't blame you for being mistrustful." Evie wasn't sure how to respond, so she remained silent. "We had similar issues in the beginning. Back when the Atru first attacked, It was difficult to trust anyone, until we realized we were all in the same situation, and we weren't lying to each other to be deceitful, but because we were afraid for our futures. We had lost so much, it seemed like we had to do everything we possibly could to protect ourselves. Evie stared at the navigation array, not really seeing it. Was that true of her crew as well? Of course, they'd been scared. They'd been through hell and back, and a third of them had been on Tempest so long it had become their permanent home. 18 years in stasis was still 18 years. But she wasn't one of them anymore, and she couldn't help them. The incident with Raffinkel had shown her that. But if there was one constant, it was that the Athru would do anything to exploit our weaknesses. "What is that supposed to mean?" Dagna asked. Gyson's voice remained non-combative. "How can you have the captain's best interests at heart if you're the one taking her away from her family?" Evie spun the chair around, her face burning. "They're not my family." "Of course they are. That's part of what the Coalition is all about. The people you serve with are those that you're closest to, and I question anyone who is trying to come between you." Her visage wasn't one of complacency or superiority, or even concern. Instead, it was perfectly neutral, and something about that neutrality infuriated Evie. Or did it infuriate Dagna? She couldn't tell which of them was more upset. "Did you know your crew had already returned to Coalition space once before?" Gyson asked, arching her good eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" Evie asked. "Once before? What did that mean?" "I spoke to Commander Wolf while she was incarcerated. She admitted to me that she brought your ship back here to try and help, but they only found destruction." "That's not possible," Evie said, trying to work out the ramifications in her mind. "They didn't have the ability. There wouldn't have been time?" "She said, when it was clear you weren't coming back, the crew voted to return home. And it took them a long time. But when they got here and found the Athru had already decimated everything, she realized there was nothing left." Gyson leaned forward. "So they decided to go back." "They came all this way, only to return to the planet?" "But why? There was no guarantee we were ever getting off that planet. She wouldn't have brought the ship back for us." Gyson smiled. "Sometimes, in the face of immeasurable loss, we cling to those we may not have considered close in the past. That's what family does." "Don't listen to her," Dagna said. "She's just trying to manipulate you, just like Caspian, just like everyone else who lied to you." "Whatever Caspian may have done to you, it wasn't to harm you. I don't want to make excuses for him, but think about it. When has he ever tried to harm you? Does he make mistakes? Absolutely. But does it mean he's malicious?" Gyson shook her head. "I know him better than that. And so do you." "What about everyone else?" Evie asked. "Cass wasn't the only one who lied to me. Box and Zax and—" Had there been anyone else? She'd assumed the entire crew had been in on it. But if she thought about it, Box had been the only one who'd seen what happened. He told Cas and Zax at some point. But outside the three of them— "Stop this foolish thinking. They are your enemies. I'm your only friend. I tell you the truth." Dagna's voice had become even harder, and it hurt Evie's throat. She glanced at Samaya, who shook her head. "Are you sure she's told you everything? Is it possible she's left something out?" Evie tried to concentrate, but the other voice in her head had become increasingly loud. What could Dagna have lied about? "Nothing. She is making you question yourself. You can only count on me to tell you the truth. Not her, not anyone." She tried to think back. She remembered running from the pyramid back into camp. And then she wasn't in her body anymore. She was back up above it all again, watching with perfect clarity as she murdered her crew and finally Laura. Why did I attack them? Attack who? Geisen asked. My crew. My girlfriend, Marshall. Why did I attack all of them? They were afraid of you, Dagny replied. They knew you were too dangerous. You had to protect yourself. Evie shook her head. That didn't sound right. Laura loved her. She never would have attacked. All she did was try to hold on to Evie, to keep her from hurting someone else. You, Evie said, the memories becoming clearer. You tricked me. You made me think they were Athru, because you were upset I'd taken back control. She looked down at her hands. They trembled. No, you're wrong, Dagny replied. I'm not wrong, Evie whispered. I attacked them because I thought they were your people, that they were there to kill my crew. You made me kill my crew. You made me kill the woman I loved. She shot up out of the chair so fast she thought she might pass out. Her body was no longer under her control. Her hands flew to the controls, programming in a sequence she didn't recognize. What's happening? What are you doing? Geisen asked. I can't control her. She's going to kill us, Evie replied, struggling against the pull of her own limbs. Not us, the voice growled. Just you. "31. You're sure no one is monitoring? Diana asked, as Ryder dropped the force barrier around her cell. He shook his head. They're all focused on other tasks. Squires is keeping an eye outside engineering, and Coley is up with the flight controller. Caspian doesn't suspect a thing. We can't underestimate him. If he's already asking about how Wolf got out of her cell, it won't take security long to question you, which means we don't have a lot of time. She stood and followed Ryder out of the cell. Are the rest of the pilots ready? He motioned for her to go ahead of him into the outer office. The ones you can trust are. They're getting into their positions on the ship now. Once people know what Diazol and Rabot did, I don't think we'll have any trouble bringing them over to our side. That's the expectation. Diana felt bad about Wolf, but she'd been a necessary casualty in this war. And that's exactly what it was. If she was going to secure the last ship in the Coalition, she needed to take those who could still do them harm out of power. She'd hoped Cass's actions would have been enough on their own for Graydon or anyone else to have him confined. But according to Ryder, the opposite had happened, which meant they needed to take more drastic measures. Ryder's comm beeped. Go ahead. It's me. They found the shuttle, Squire said on the other end. Diana whipped her head around to stare at him. Impossible. She's supposed to be dead. She rubbed the back of her hand where they deactivated her own comm. It was a security measure for anyone who had been incarcerated, and she couldn't reactivate it without alerting the ship's comm grid, which they'd see on the bridge. I'm telling you, I'm outside engineering, and they're talking about catching up with it. She's out there and still headed for the Hummel system. Damn it, Diana said. She'd have to leave the Coup to her associates. She made a promise to destroy Diazol, and she wasn't going to leave any loose ends. I'll have to go after her, finish this myself. But with her off the ship, aren't we out of danger? Ryder asked. What about when a fleet of Athru ships arrives and blows right through our armor because she told them our magnetic frequencies? She knows too much to be left alive. But I'll need help. I won't be able to make it out there without someone deactivating the ship's weapons. Did you hear that? Ryder asked into his comm. We could get Linkovich, Squire suggested. He could sabotage the weapon systems from down on 15. Do it, Diana ordered. I'm heading to the bay. I assume we're on an intercept course? We are. I just heard them say 10 minutes. That gives me just enough time to get suited up and into my space wing before we arrive. The weapons will need to be down as soon as we come out of the undercurrent. She indicated for Ryder to check the adjacent hallway. He stepped forward, peering out the open doors both ways. I understand, Squire said. We'll be ready. Do you want backup out there? Yes. Get Wilmoth and Coley to meet me in there. The three of us should be able to do it. She followed Ryder when he indicated, both of them moving at a brisk pace down the hallways until they reached the closest access point. Will do, Chief. Be careful. He paused. You too, Michael. Thanks, Ryder said, a small smile on his lips. He looked like he was about to say something else, but instead he glanced at Diana, then cut the comm. Take this access junction down to 88D, then turn left. You'll see. I know the internal schematics of the ship, Diana snapped, and Ryder shut up. Just make sure everyone is ready to go in less than 10 minutes. You know the importance of this, so I won't say it again. But don't screw up. She pressed a finger into his chest before turning and climbing into the access corridor. He shut the access panel behind her, and Diana was enveloped in darkness, except for the small sensor lights that came on as she crawled through the junction. Ryder was competent enough, but he wasn't one of her pilots. He didn't have the same loyalty they did. Well, most of them. Ryant and Jan were lost causes. The two people who should have been most upset at Rabot for what he did ended up being his two new best friends. She wasn't sure something wasn't going on between him and Jan, which made them both liabilities. It was as if instead of taking away one of her pilots, he'd taken away 3, and she was going to make sure he paid for it. Chief Diana Raffenkel was about to take control of the last Navy ship in the Coalition, and not Rabot nor anyone else was going to stop her. She shimmied down adjacent junctions until she reached level 13, where she had to turn and continue along a long, straight path until she reached the bay. Only a few people had seen her arrest or passed her on the way to the brig with her hands bound behind her back, but she wasn't willing to take the chance someone would see her in the corridor and ask her why she wasn't in the brig anymore. This was too important, which meant another 50 meters inside the sweltering access conduits. At the end of the lane, she popped the cover panel and climbed out, relishing in the cool air of the bay. Ahead of her were the line of space wings they still had. 4 had been left behind on the planet's surface. Diana assumed they were still there, and if time was still moving as fast as it had been when they left the planet, it had literally only been seconds since leaving them. Which meant they could go back for them one day. Not that 4 space wings would make a difference in any kind of confrontation, but Diana didn't like the idea of leaving them down there. It was like leaving friends behind. The bay was empty, except for Coley and the flight controller up in the glass above. Diana held Coley's gaze a moment, until she motioned all was clear. Diana waved, then trotted over to Griffin's ship. Her own space wing was one of the ones left on the planet, but she didn't think Licia would mind. In fact, there was a certain poetic justice in using Griffin's ship to right the wrongs that had been done by Rabot and Diazol. They were the ones who got them into this mess. As she was mounting up on the ship, Wilmoth appeared, and then Coley, having come down from the FC. "Squires explain the mission?" Diana asked, checking her temperature suit. They both nodded. "Stop the shuttle," Wilmoth said. "At any cost," Diana added. "She can't be allowed to contact the Athru or put the ship in jeopardy." "And if she already has?" Coley asked. "We just have to hope she hasn't. Wilmoth, comm Squires. I want to know how much longer." She tapped her comm. "Squires? Chief's asking for an update." "Tell her I don't know," Squires whispered. "I'm trying to stay out of sight, and this isn't helping." He paused. "Maybe another minute or 2. We're close." "Thanks," Wilmoth said, as Diana nodded approval. She entered the comm. "Suit up. Get in your space wings. Anything unexpected happens, at least one of us has to get out there, even if it means firing on our own people." Wilmoth and Coley exchanged glances. "Are you sure?" Coley asked. Diana didn't like the hesitation in her voice, but it was too late. They were all committed now. Instead of answering, she climbed the ladder to her ship and strapped herself inside. The others did the same without another word of dissent. If all went to plan, in half an hour the ship would be under their control, and Diazol would be dead. Diana couldn't help but think once she was gone, all the fight would go out of her bow. After that, it would be a cinch. "We're approaching the shuttle," Rond announced. 5 minutes. Cas settled into his seat on the bridge. He wasn't comfortable taking the captain's chair, not yet. He would deal with that once they had Evie safely back aboard. "I'm detecting some erratic readings," Zoll said. "Explain," Cas said. The shuttle. It's veering wildly off course. And I'm detecting power buildups in the primary life support systems. It looks like she might be trying to overload the system. Zal's normally serene face had been replaced by one with concern. When had he done that? Was he programming more emotive faces for other situations? Cas frowned at him. Why would she upset her life support system? What could she be thinking? Is it possible it could be malfunctioning? Possible, Zal replied. Talia entered the bridge along with Graydon, the former taking her spot at tactical from the crewman who temporarily replaced her. Any luck? Cas asked. She shook her head. There's no sign of Captain Geisen on the ship. As for the matter of who killed Commander Wolf, Zach says she needs more time to... Cass's comm beeped. Cas? He tapped it. Saturina. What's wrong? Something's going on, she said, worry tainting her voice. The only other time he'd heard her like this had been back when they'd encountered that bear thing on the planet. Something how? I don't know. But I passed Linkovich in the hall, and he gave me a strange look. Cas glanced at Graydon and Talia, who were staring at him. Murmuring to himself, he left the first officer's chair and headed to the far side of the room, where no one else could eavesdrop. That hardly seems cause for concern, he finally replied. No, you don't get it. I know Linkovich. We've been on the same team for years. You develop a certain camaraderie with these people, and I'm telling you, something's wrong. Cas wasn't about to tell her she was being paranoid. But on the other hand, what could he do? Something being wrong was kind of the definition of their situation at the moment. Have you noticed anything else? Anything that might... He trailed off, watching the large screen as the undercurrent began to fade. Look, I know it's not a lot to go on, but I thought you should know. I'll try to find Squires or Coley. Maybe they know more. Okay, Cas said, in a hurry to end the call. They should almost be on top of the shuttle. Keep me informed. He returned to his chair as space in the screen normalized. There was no indication of the shuttle. Report. Where is it? Overshot it, sir, Rond replied. The shuttle's undercurrent is no longer active. The image on the screen blurred as the ship turned in place. Finally, Cas saw the shuttle in the distance, making a series of strange maneuvers. It looked like it was trying to avoid fire from invisible enemies. Prepare to use the grapplers and reel the ship back in, he ordered. Ron took them closer in position. She's all over the place, sir. This is going to be tricky. He and Ensign River looked like they were working in concert to get the ship's grappling systems to line up with the shuttle, jerking back and forth like it was suspended on the end of a giant string. I have full confidence... Sir? We have an unscheduled launch from Bay 2, Talia said, alarms going off all over her panel. 3 space wings have just left the bay, headed for the shuttle. Who is it? Cas asked. She shook her head. Their transponders aren't on. I can't tell who is in which ship. Cas pointed to Zal. Open comm lines. I want to know what the hell they're doing. He nodded, indicating it was open. Tempest to Space Wing fighters. Turn around now. You're not authorized to be outside the ship. I'm doing what you should have done the moment you learned Diazol was a traitor. Cas's blood went cold. Somehow Raffinkel had gotten out of the brig and onto a ship with weapons. Chief, whatever you may think about the captain, you are not to engage that shuttle. Do you understand me? I understand you'd rather put your friendship with Diazol above the safety of the crew, she replied. But those days are over. You're a traitor, and you've always been a traitor. And today, the real citizens of the Coalition regained command. Cas shook his head. She just wouldn't give up. Are they in grappling range? They will reach the shuttle before we can grab them, Zal replied. Ensign, Cas said, lock weapons on those 3 fighters and prepare to fire. Aye, Talia replied. Chief, one last chance. Stand down or be destroyed. It was either that or let her reach Evie first. and he had no doubt in his mind Raffinkel would destroy that shuttle as soon as she had a lock on it. They'd probably already have a lock on it if it weren't for Evie's erratic piloting. "I don't think so," Raffinkel replied. Cas didn't like the smile in her voice. He nodded to Talia. She tapped her controls, but out on the screen, nothing happened. "Sir, weapons aren't functioning." Talia's eyes met Cas's. Sabotage. On the other end of the comm, Cas could hear Raffinkel's laughter. 32. This wasn't happening. Not again. Evie was not going to allow this creature to take control of her, or the shuttle, or any other aspect of her life again. But even though she was fighting with everything she had, Dagna had taken over her motor functions and was in the process of overloading the life support system, while at the same time sending the shuttle along an erratic path that threatened to push the dampeners to their limit. If they failed, Evie and Captain Geisen could be crushed from the forces. "If you do this," Evie managed to say, "you'll only end up killing yourself." "My people can remove me from your mind," Dagna replied, "even after you've been dead. I was dormant for 31 years. A few more weeks makes no difference." "What is going on?" Geisen yelled. Out of the corner of her eye, Evie could see her holding onto a handhold in the back of the shuttle, her body swaying back and forth as the dampeners were pushed past their designed limits. "She's determined to kill us both," Evie replied, "and I don't think she's taking no for an answer." "I've spent too much time in this form as it is. My consciousness will be transferred to a body that fits me, rather than attempt to modify this one. But I can't be extracted unless you're dead." Evie grunted, trying to stop her hands from moving over the controls, but Dagna was too strong. There had to be a way to regain control. To her left, a proximity sensor went off. She struggled to turn her neck, finding she could get it a third of the way there. 3 ships, incoming. "Can't you stop her?" Geisen yelled. "I don't know how." 3 ships. Where could they have come from? If she could just reach over there, she could get IDs on them, figure out who they were. Had Dagna found a way to contact her own people already? Were they about to be boarded? "I don't guess you have a weapon on you." "Not at the moment," Geisen replied. Not that it mattered much. She was still behind the force barrier and couldn't reach Evie. She'd been so stupid. Why had she thought she could trust Dagna? Wishful thinking. She'd hoped there would be one person in her life that wouldn't lie to her, and she'd thought that person would have a vested self-interest in keeping her body intact. But now it was clear. She was only interested in tearing Evie down. Perhaps to regain full mental control as well as physical again, or some other purpose. Evie remembered how Dagna had laughed when she'd realized what Evie had done to her own crew. That had been right before she'd blacked out. She was a vile creature and didn't deserve to live. "We deserve more than you can even comprehend," Dagna replied, apparently sensing Evie's thoughts. Why was it she could understand what Evie was thinking, but not the other way around? Whenever Evie reached out to probe, there was nothing there to find. She had to shut her mind down to any kind of intrusion, no matter if it was internal or not. But Evie had managed to expel her once before, though it had been because of Laura. It seemed that the strength of that bond had been enough to give Evie the push she needed. The ship shook with a massive jolt, sending both Evie and Geisen to the ground. Evie's head struck the deck plating, and stars exploded in her vision. For one brief second, she realized she had control over her own body again. Despite the pain, she jumped up and identified the approaching ships. Space Wing fighters. Where did those come from? She opened the scanning range to find Tempest sitting just outside weapons range, headed for her. "I don't believe it." "What?" Geisen said. "It's the... Arrgh!" Her hands jerked away from her like a puppeteer had taken them and resumed extreme evasive maneuvers. "Thought you had a reprieve, did you?" Dagna replied. Evie watched in horror as she finished a sequence of controls set to ignite the overloading life support system. They'd be dead in minutes if that blew. And it looked like Cas had finally made his decision. She was too dangerous to be kept alive. I told you, the voice spat. Who? Geisen asked, concern finally working its way into her voice. It's Cas and the others. He sent the Space Wings to destroy us, Evie replied. All the fight had gone from her. She didn't even bother resisting Dagna anymore. In the back of her mind, a voice laughed, cheering that it had achieved victory. He wouldn't do that, Geisen replied. Maybe you don't know him as well as you think you do, Evie replied. Even she couldn't deny it was probably the right choice. After all, she had killed a lot of people. People who had trusted her. People who had counted on her. I refuse to believe it. Cas may be a self-centered jerk sometimes, but he always gives people a chance. Evie tried to laugh, but the voice wouldn't let her. I think I've used up all of my chances. The proximity sensor went off again. Evie didn't even bother to look at it. She just waited for the Space Wings to come in and blow the shuttle in half. But wait. Even if Cas was there to put Evie out of her misery, he wouldn't sacrifice Geisen in the process. He wasn't that determined. Yes, he would. You're dangerous enough, it justifies the killing of innocents. That is how badly they want to get rid of you. I don't believe it, Evie thought. He wasn't that cold-blooded. She managed to slide her eyes over to the proximity alert to see 2 more ships coming in. With a strength she didn't think she had, she tore one of her hands away to tap the alert. It showed 2 more Space Wings coming in and firing at the 3 already pursuing her. He hadn't come to kill her. Raffenkel had. You're right, she whispered. What? Geisen yelled, still holding on for dear life. The hand tried to move back to the controls, but Evie wouldn't let it. You were right. He didn't come here to kill us. By some miracle, he was still trying to save them. The whole ship was trying to save them. No! I've had enough of you, Evie yelled inside her mind, and she closed her eyes, focusing her thoughts. She was on a precipice overlooking nothing but fog and darkness. She had been there once before, when Dagna had taken over her mind. However, this time, the place felt more real, like the side of a cliff. And in the infinite beyond was nothing but dark clouds and storms. At the edge of the precipice sat a creature, its head much too big for its body, and its skeletal arms hanging down at its sides. It was completely naked, its pasty white body covered in sores, and the hair on its head in stringy patches. It turned, its horrifying mouth unable to close because of the number of razor-sharp teeth inside. You came back to face me again, she said, standing. Her skin hung off her bones, sagging and wet with a sheen. I beat you once before, Evie said. You pushed me away. You did not beat me, the creature replied. And the more time you spend in here, the stronger I get out there. What are you? Evie asked. You're not Athru. You look nothing like them. Oh, but I am. I'm the result of the union of an Athru and a human, just like you. But I'm the discarded product. What remains after being sequestered away for so long? Once we looked very much alike, but now... She held out a bony hand, the fingers ending in sharp razor claws. It moved faster than Evie could see, slashing across her face, and she stumbled back, holding her cheek. Her hand came away, wet with blood. You might as well give up. We have taken your coalition. We have killed your race. There is nothing to be gained but to accept your place in history. That of a small, failed subspecies that didn't deserve its own good fortune. What's that supposed to mean? Evie asked, scooting back as the creature stepped forward. It means you never should have settled this part of the galaxy. You weren't supposed to be here. What are you talking about? Our home planet is here. Oh, how quickly you forget, Dagna said. Another of your many failings. The planet in the Horus system you called Earth was not your home. You should have died out here. You were never meant to survive. None of this was making sense. Evie had to admit she wasn't up to speed on ancient coalition history as she probably should have been. But she knew one thing was certain. Humans came from Earth. There was no question about it. Dagna was doing nothing but distracting her, while Evie inched further and further back toward the other end of the precipice. She didn't want to think about what could be below. She didn't want to think about falling forever. Last time she'd fallen into something like a gravity well, something she could fight her way back out of. But glancing over the edge, somehow she knew if she fell off, there was no coming back. I don't know why you have such a problem with my people, but I'm going to make damn sure our story doesn't end here. Your people may have killed most of the humans in the galaxy, but as long as there are a few of us left, you still haven't won. Something we plan on rectifying immediately, Dagny replied. She raised up her hand with the claws, Evie's blood glistening off the ends as an ugly grimace came over her face. Evie closed her outstretched hand, feeling the heft of something in it, and swung up with all her strength. Dagna's hand stayed in the air as a curious look came over her hideous face. It soon transformed into a grimace. Dagna looked down, and Evie looked up at the same time to see Evie's sword buried in Dagna's chest, right where the human heart would be. The creature seemed as surprised as Evie was. Where had the sword come from? Then again, it wasn't like this place was real. It was a battlefield in her mind. Dagna staggered to the side, grasping onto the hilt of the blade as lightning flashed in the distance. Evie scrambled up, preparing to defend herself as the creature fell to her side, blood spilling from her wound. She was trying to remove the sword, but couldn't seem to make it budge. "It won't come out," she said in gurgled breaths. "That's because I put it there," Evie replied, "and there it stays." She walked over to Dagna, whose claws were digging at the dirt, trying to right herself. "No more second chances," Evie said, and with one foot she pushed the creature to the edge of the precipice and over the edge, sword still buried in her chest. The last thing she saw before she disappeared below the endless clouds was the light leave its eyes. "Captain? Captain, wake up!" Evie blinked. Above her, the gray bulkheads of the shuttle gave way to the main windscreen. She was back on the floor again. With some difficulty, she sat up. The ship rocked back and forth, almost throwing her to the ground again. "Oh, thank Kor. I thought you were dead," Geisen said. Evie glanced over to see the captain on her hands and knees, bracing herself. "Are you okay? They're still strafing us. I don't know how much longer we can hold out." Her eyes narrowed. "What?" Evie asked. "Your cheek. Did you cut yourself when you fell?" Evie touched her cheek. A smear of red blood came away on her fingers. Somehow, when Dagna had attacked her in her mind, it had produced a physical effect. But could that mean it went both ways? She reached out with both hands, flexing her fingers and moving her legs. Her body was hers to control again. She'd done it. "I'm going to get us out of here," Evie said, jumping up. She took the pilot seat and disengaged the force barrier. "Take this seat. It'll be safer," she said. Geisen looked relieved as she clambered into the seat beside Evie. "What happened to you?" she asked. "I think I finally got rid of my demons," Evie replied. Already she felt lighter, less encumbered. She hadn't felt like this since before she went to see her father on Sypaxia. "I'm glad to hear it." Evie checked their surroundings. 5 Space Wings were engaged in a dogfight all around them. One of the ships would take a run for the shuttle until another cut it off, leaving a third free to pursue them. Evie tapped the comm. "Diazol to Tempest." "You're not dead," Cas said, relief in his voice. "Not yet. What is going on?" She activated the shuttle's engines and began maneuvers to stay ahead of the shuttle currently pursuing them. She reached over and shut down the life support overload. "Chief Raffenkel is leading a small squadron to take you out. She's disabled our weapons and apparently was in charge of an unsuccessful coup here on the ship. I've got Jan and Riot out there trying to keep her off your back." Raffenkel. Evie hadn't even paid her any attention since they'd come back from the surface. But she'd been one of the ones in Wave 1 who had spent an entire season down there, and it had had a negative effect on her. Maybe if Evie had spoken to her earlier or found a way to allay her fears. But in one sense, she had been right. Evie was dangerous for the ship. But that didn't mean she was going to let herself be destroyed. "Can you still pilot the shuttle?" Cas asked. Evie checked all her instruments. So far, everything was still operating. "Yes. And if I can't, Captain Geisen can take over." "Samaya?" Cas asked. "Sorry, Cas. I saw the chance and I took it." She gave Evie a sly smile. "You could have been killed." "What else is new? If my life isn't at risk, I'm doing something wrong." Evie could just imagine Cas's frustration. It brought a smile to her face. "Swing back around and we'll pick you up. Let me deal with Rafenkel before she kills someone out there." "Sounds good to me," Evie replied, setting course back to the ship. She'd had enough fighting for one day. 33. "How long until weapons are back online?" Cas asked, leaning forward in his chair. He'd asked Graydon to meet the shuttle back in the bay and to make sure Samaya and Evie were all right. He also planned on having a full security contingent down there, just in case Evie's alter ego decided to make another appearance. "They're telling me another 15 minutes, Talia said. "Linkovich did a real number down there." "Then we'll have to do this the hard way," Cas replied. "The shuttle is on its way back, sir," Rivers said. "But the Space Wings are still in pursuit." "Get Rafenkel on the comm for me," Cas said. Behind him, the hypervator opened, and Zenfor stepped out, holding two bodies by their respective collars. The swaying figures were either knocked out or dead. Cas couldn't tell which. "Hold that a moment." He stood. "Found this one sneaking around engineering with an open comm to the rest of his team," Zenfor said, dropping the first body into a pile on the floor. It was Squire's. "And this one was already in the hypervator when I got inside. Took one look at me holding his partner and decided to open fire." She dropped the other body. It was crewman Ryder. He moaned as he hit the floor. "It only took the threat of my fist to his face to confess. He was on his way to take over the bridge by killing you, Caspian." Cas walked around the command chairs and stood over the bodies. Ryder's eyes were half open, and his right cheek was in the process of swelling. "I thought you said you only threatened to hit him." "After he confessed, I hit him anyway. It seemed an appropriate punishment." "Good work." On his way to take over the bridge. Had Rafenkel been that deluded? And now it made sense how both Wolf and Rafenkel got out of their cells. Cas turned back to Zal. "Open that comm." Zal nodded, confirming the channel was open. "Chief Rafenkel, your attempts to take the ship were unsuccessful. We've captured your accomplices and will be detaining them. And your attempts to destroy the shuttle have failed. Surrender now." "Not on your life. You don't deserve to be on that bridge, and you don't deserve to be part of this crew. And I'm not going to let this monster get away with what she did." The amount of vitriol in her voice was palpable, even over the comm. "She's cut the line, sir," Zal said. "Commander, she's heading right for the shuttle," Rivers said, indicating the trajectory on the screen. "She's making a suicide run," Cas said. He turned to Talia. "Are we in range for grapplers?" She shook her head. There had to be something. 15 seconds, River yelled. Cas ran over to Zal's station, opening another comm. "Saturina?" "She's heading for—" "I see her," Jan said. "We're still too far away," he said, a lump rising in his throat. He couldn't give this order. He couldn't sacrifice one life for another. "Don't worry. I'll take care of it." She ended the transmission. Cas turned away, fighting back the urge to scream. Why did it have to be like this? Was every person he met destined to die for him in some terrible way? "Captain Jan has changed course," Rivers said. "She's headed right for Rafenkel's ship. She'll intercept in 7, 6, 5... Cas watched on the screen as Jan's green vehicle closed in on Rafenkel's red one. Cas was tempted to close his eyes, but couldn't. Instead, he lowered his head to stare at his boots. They were covered in scuffs. "Holy shit," Rivers said, jumping out of her chair. Cas snapped up as the screen went white for a second. "What happened?" Cas yelled. "Who was that?" Wilmoth? River asked, running to Ron's station. I don't know, Ron replied, checking his instruments. Ensign, what happened? Cas said. It appears either Captain Coley or Captain Wilmoth rammed Chief Ravenkel's ship before Captain Jan could get there, Saul replied. Cas turned to the screen. Evie's shuttle and the other space wings had escaped the blast. Are they? Both ships were destroyed in the collision, Talia said. It was Coley, River replied. Wilmoth's still out there. Ryan and Jan are escorting her back in. She took her post again. ETA 4 minutes to Bay 2. Interesting. Zenfor stepped over the bodies of the men she'd dropped, as if they were nothing but discarded parts. Why would Coley sacrifice herself when Ravenkel was the clear instigator? I don't know, Cas said, but he was thankful she had. Whatever motivated Coley to make the ultimate sacrifice had spared everyone he cared about. Maybe the guilt of firing on her fellow pilots. Humans have a lot of trouble with guilt. So I've noticed, she replied. Incoming transmission, Saul said. Cas nodded. Cas? It was Jan. I don't know what happened. I didn't have time to stop her. She just... It's okay, he replied. Just get yourselves home. We'll figure out the rest when you're all aboard. Right, she replied. But he could tell from the tension in her voice she was rattled. She'd been ready to lay down her life to save Evie and Samaya, and had watched someone else do it instead. Jan out. Cas turned to his bridge crew. As soon as everyone is back aboard, I want full armor. Then get us back on course to Sisk. I'm going down to the bay with Graydon. He addressed Talia. Security in place? Yes, sir, she replied. Get medical down there, too, just in case. There was no telling how Evie might react coming back on board the ship. And if Box was right and they had to sedate her again, he wanted to be ready. He stopped short of the 2 moaning bodies behind Zenfor. Thank you for stopping him. She shrugged. I doubt he could have done much damage anyway. Crewman Ryder is not the best shot with a pulse pistol and doesn't have the nerves for such a job. He was only doing it because of his bond with Squires. Well, they can both be bonded inside the brig. Ryder's eyes cracked open, and he caught Cass's eyes. He turned his head, staring at the wall instead of trying to hold Cass's gaze. Talia joined them. This is my fault, sir, she said. I should have seen this coming. So should I. Don't beat yourself up, Ensign. He motioned to the 2 of them. Would you help the consul here get them back down to the brig? We'll need someone we can trust to take over Ryder's post. I'll take care of it immediately, sir. She reached down and grabbed Squires by his hair, causing his eyes to snap open as she yanked on it, lifting him up as he screamed. Effective, Zenfor said, mimicking the action with Ryder, who likewise screamed at the possibility of all his hair being ripped from his skull lest he stood up. She smiled. I've always liked you, Ensign. Cas made a quick stop by his quarters before making his way down to the bay. He was just in time to join Graydon and Box as Evie's shuttle entered the end of the bay and maneuvered its way down to the closest parking station. Deja vu? Box asked, leaning down to him. Let's hope not, Cas replied, rolling the small black orb around in his palm, still inside his pocket. He still wasn't sure what giving it to Evie would do, but he'd kept it from her long enough. Whatever happened, happened, and they would deal with it accordingly. The shuttle set down, and the side panel opened to reveal Samaya, who stepped down the ramp holding her right side. Talia's security forces stepped forward, and one helped her the rest of the way. It looked like a courtesy, but they'd been instructed to get Samaya as far away from Evie as possible, just in case. I need the body of an Erustian, she said, as Box performed a quick scan. Bruised ribs, easy fix. Cas glanced at the shuttle's opening where Evie stood. She hadn't followed yet. From what? Cas, she's fine. Whatever demons she was battling, she conquered them. You don't need to worry about her anymore. Samaya drew in a breath, then winced. Then what is that from? He asked. He left the orb alone in his pocket. From when I hit one of the control panels as that thing was jerking the ship all over the place. She didn't have control. But she does now. Cas watched as she and Graydon embraced, and for a brief moment he realized something more might be going on there. But now wasn't the time. He turned his attention back to Evie. 4 security officers stood 5 meters away from the shuttle's opening in a semicircle. Thank Cor they hadn't drawn their weapons yet. She took a step forward and put her hands up. "Okay," Cas said, joining the security officers. "Put your hands down. You look ridiculous." She shook her head. "These officers need to escort me directly to the brig," she said, taking another tentative step. "Samaya said, the Athru is gone, dead. But that doesn't erase what I did. I killed 7 of my own crew. I don't deserve any freedom." A pained look was stretched across her face. She made it to the bottom of the ramp and stood there, her hands still raised. "These aren't exactly normal circumstances," Cas replied. "Not to mention, I already have at least 4 people I have to hold. I don't want to make it 5. It isn't as if there are any more Coalition holding facilities where I can transfer prisoners." "Drop me on Sisk. Leave me there, then get as far away as possible," she said. They were less than 2 meters apart. "Evie, it wasn't your fault. You didn't know what you were doing." "I know," she said. Her eyes shimmered before she blinked it away. "That makes it worse." "How?" "Because I am so vulnerable. I'm a liability to this crew and its survival. You keep me here, I'm going to get all of us killed." He stared into her eyes and saw nothing but pain and regret. He'd seen that face before, in the mirror. And what had all that regret gotten him? It didn't bring people back from the dead, nor did it assuage his guilt. His only comfort had come from being part of something larger, from being part of this crew, whether he wanted to or not. She hadn't given up on him, and he wasn't going to give up on her. "Put your hands down," he whispered. Defiance shone in her eyes, but finally she did. "I'm sorry I tried to hide the truth from you. I knew it was wrong, and I let my fear override my better judgment. I never should have made that decision." She bobbed, and she kept his gaze. "Thank you. And don't hold it against Box, or Zach's. It was my idea from the beginning. They both told me the risk, and I ignored it. I've also been keeping something else from you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small orb. He held it out for her. Her eyebrows formed a V. "What is it?" "I don't know. Marshall gave it to me. But I think he meant it for you. Something to do with your mother." Evie's eyes flared, and she reached out. Cas braced himself. There was no telling what might happen when she took it. Her fingers closed over the black orb, and for one brief second, previously invisible runes glowed blue on the surface, then faded to black again. "Wow," she said. "What is it? What did it do?" His heart hammered in his chest. Had it turned her back into an Athru again? Or something worse? "I think it's a beacon," she said. "Like back at Omicron Terminus, when I could see the map in my mind. I can see. We're close. I was right. Sisk is where we need to go. This is pointing us there." She stared at him a moment longer, then jumped forward, embracing him in a hug. Behind him, Cas heard the drawing of weapons. "Wait!" he yelled. "It's okay." He hugged her back until she let go. "Are you okay?" he asked. He'd never known her to be so warm. A smile spread across her face. "I think I am." He turned back to the security officers. "At ease," he said. "I don't think the captain is going to hurt anyone here." "Still," she said, though there was a smile in her voice now, "maybe it's better if I stay in my quarters until we arrive, assuming that's where we're still going." He nodded. "You're the boss." "Technically, you are. When I stole this shuttle, I gave up my right to command. It's your ship now. At least until I have a trial to determine the consequences of my actions." "I don't know how I feel about that," he replied. It almost felt like taking the ship out from under her. "How about temporary captain until your trial. Though they both knew the likelihood of a trial was nil. Are you sure? Being a starship captain had been one of her most important goals. He couldn't imagine her giving it up so easily. I think I might be destined for something more, she said, holding the small black orb. At the very least, I need to figure this out before I do anything else. Out of the corner of his eye, Cas saw Jan and Ryan enter the bay, each of them with a hand on Captain Wilmoth. Cas still had some loose threads to tie up. Okay, then, Ms. Diazal. Cas turned to Crewman Barstow. Crewman, please take the former captain to her quarters. Yes, sir, she replied. A smile passed between the two women, though Cas had no idea what it was about. But he didn't linger on it. He had to face reality now. This was his ship, and his responsibility. He had a lot to take care of. 34. Is that all of them? Cas asked, eyeing each of the occupants of the cells. We think so, Jan replied, standing beside him. Ryan and I spoke to each of them, and I trust none of the rest of the pilots knew about Raffinkel's coup attempts. Cas stared at the group of pilots, Linkovich, Wilmoth, Iavarone, and Squires, and crewmen Ryder and Bostock, the latter who had been the flight controller helping frame Evie. Raffinkel's inner circle she'd been priming ever since they'd returned from the planet. At least Cas understood Ryder's motivation. He'd been in a relationship with Squires, and thus drawn into the fray. But Bostock? He couldn't quite understand. I think you're missing someone, Linkovich said. Yeah. Isn't it customary to only put the people who've committed crimes behind bars? Iavarone said. You did commit a crime, Cas replied. Conspiracy, which led to the deaths of your fellow crewmates. Had any of you come to me, or the captain, at any time, Commander Wolf, Captain Coley, and Chief Raffinkel would still be with us. Linkovich laughed. Come to you? A traitor to the cause? Is that what happened with Lieutenant Yamashita? She confided a problem with the captain to you, and so you decided to have her killed? Oh, shut up, Alec. You don't even know what you're talking about, Jan said. At least Coley had the guts to make the right decision in the end, which is more than I can say for you. As best they could tell, Captain Coley's guilt had finally gotten to her, and she couldn't deal with the fact she'd attacked her own fellow pilots and been a party to treason. That had been Jan's summation anyway, knowing Coley as she did. I know Raffi didn't trust you or Dorsey enough to even let you get close to us. You made your choice clear when you sided with him after what happened to Griffin. Jan rolled her eyes. Same old argument. Some people don't know how to let things go. And some people let their feelings override their better judgment, Linkovich said. Cas noticed Jan's face redden. He decided to change the subject. I hope you're all comfortable, because until further notice, these 4 walls are your new home. As soon as we can find a coalition magistrate to hear your cases, we will of course begin the proceedings. But... He paused for dramatic effect. This was fun. It might be a while. Linkovich's scowl told him everything he needed to know. Cas gave them all a winning smile, then left them all to stew. In the outer office, their newest security officer stood. Captain, sir, Breach said, saluting. At ease, Cas said, trying to hide his smile. Breach had decked himself out in a modified security officer's uniform, which had been torn in certain places to make room for his unique anatomy. The back of his shirt was completely missing, so his remaining mandible was visible. You got this covered? Bulak can go long periods without rest, he said. And if they try anything... A razor-sharp blade appeared from behind his back, stabbing at the open air in quick, measured attacks. They will regret it. And you don't mind doing this instead of engineering? I've been doing engineering all my life. Breach began to make a hand gesture, but stopped and made an exaggerated shrug instead, looking to Cas for approval. Cas gave an almost imperceptible nod that it was the right use of body language. It's nice to have something new. His eyes cast downward. I am sorry about deceiving you. It's okay, Cas replied. I know why you did it. Ahem. Cas glanced to the door where Jan stood, waiting. Cas headed for the door. Commander Graydon will check in with you at the end of your shift. Good luck, Mr. Vreege. Thank you, sir. He made another exaggerated salute as they left him to his new job. He seems happy, Jan said once they were in the hallway. I think he's just glad he's not in there with them. Loyalty is a big issue with Vreege. But it wasn't as if he could blame him, or Zenfor, or any of the others for following Vol's orders. Cas wished he could apologize to her as well. He hadn't understood the kind of pressure she was under until now. But he was going to make sure her death wasn't in vain. This crew was going to survive, no matter what it took. You've got that look, Jan said, the corners of her mouth upturned. What look? That I'm taking care of business look. It's cute. Cas's heart picked up its pace. He took a deep breath. I've been putting this off far too long. She arched an eyebrow, but kept walking. He might as well say it and get it out there. If there was one thing being back aboard the ship had taught him, it was that you never knew how much time you had left. I like you. Jan stopped, her mouth open in an exaggerated gesture. Holy shit. It finally happened. I thought I would be waiting until the universe collapsed into abject darkness. He put up his hands in a defensive gesture. Guilty as charged. I'm slow. And I'm terrible at relationships. Oh, I know, she grinned, then continued walking. He jogged to keep up with her. Wait a second. What do you mean, you know? Box told me all about your history, and how you like to be in control. Cas's face fell. He was going to kill that robot. Don't worry. I like a challenge. I'm not sure I like the sound of that. I'd expect someone who is terrible at relationships to say that. He could tell she was having too much fun with this. If Box had told her everything, it meant she knew about Liss. So, do we, have dinner? Or... Cor, you are terrible at this. She stopped again and took one of his hands in hers. It was as if he'd grabbed onto a live wire. He had the sudden urge to press his lips to hers. It was as if he were noticing them for the first time, and they looked pillow-soft. Dinner sounds nice, when you get a free moment. As I understand it, the captain doesn't have a lot of spare time. He was still getting used to the idea. That goes for the head of the Space Corps as well, he replied, smiling. Her face dropped. Don't do that. I don't want any special treatment because we might be dating. Give it to Ryant instead. I'm just a pilot. He's the one with grand ambitions. But you're the better candidate, Cas replied. Someone had to replace Raffinkel, and the remaining Space Wing pilots needed a new chief, if for no other reason than to coordinate with the Navy side of the crew. Look, this isn't my decision. This is based on rank. After Raffinkel, Linkovich was second in command, and then it was Iavarone. Who came after them? She huffed. Squires. Then me. Exactly. So I'm not doing anything. The Space Corps aren't part of the Coalition Navy, so there shouldn't be any impropriety. You're free to refuse my orders at any time. Can I refuse this one? He shrugged. Sure, but we still need a new chief. And I wouldn't be surprised if the remaining pilots chose you anyway. She cursed, dropping his hand. I've changed my mind. This is too much trouble. She made her way down the hall, leaving him behind. 1,500 hours? I promise it won't be bagged rations, he called after her. She stopped, hesitating, then turned, a sly smile on her face. Maybe you're not so bad at this after all. Then she continued on her way, her silver hair bouncing with each step. Cas smiled. He felt like bouncing himself. Evie sat on her bed, rolling the black orb back and forth in her hand. She'd managed to make it dance across the backs of her fingers and caught it almost every time. Touching it was like being enveloped in a warm blanket, and she hadn't felt so calm or secure in years. As soon as she'd taken it, it was as if all her concerns had been moved to the side, and following the beacon had become the most important goal in her life. It didn't even bother her she'd voluntarily given up her command. The orb could lead to the meaning she'd been seeking ever since she was little. And in some way, she thought it might be able to help Sesster too, though she didn't know how. But it felt like it could. And if there was anything they could do for him, she wouldn't hesitate. He'd managed to keep her sane when things in her mind had gone awry. She was eager to return the favor. She glanced up at the sword still positioned on her wall. She'd half expected it to be gone when she returned, that she'd somehow summoned it into her mind space and lost it when Dagna had fallen off the cliff. But it had been there, right where she'd left it when she'd first come in. Maybe she hadn't needed the real sword in her hand, just the idea of the sword. The idea itself held enough power to defeat her intruder. For the first time since she'd woken up in that strange pyramid down of the planet, she felt normal again. Like her mind was her own, and nothing was clawing at the edges trying to get in. All they needed to do now was to follow the beacon to its source, and all her questions would be answered. Her door chimed. She stood, placing the orb in her pocket and straightening her civilian clothes. She only had one set, but she'd put them on as soon as she'd come back in her room. It wasn't proper to wear her uniform anymore. She still wasn't convinced she shouldn't be in the brig. But if she were, she'd never get to return to Sisk. So maybe she'd trust Cas in this one. "Come in." Ensign Talia entered, followed by Cas. "We're here," he said. He must have seen her face light up, because he shook his head. "It's not looking promising. The planet isn't answering our comms, and there's no interplanetary traffic either." "Life signs?" she asked. "Plenty, all 12 species. But they're just not talking." "I need to get to the surface." The homing beacon in her mind told her she needed to head for the western continent in the northeast quadrant. She didn't think it was a coincidence that was where she used to live as a child. In fact, she was willing to bet the beacon led her straight to her old home. She didn't know why, but to her it made sense. "I'm not taking any chances," Cas said. "The last time we went down on a planet, we had issues." "This isn't the same. Sisk is charted, has been for 1,000 years or more." His eyes softened. "Evie, with the Athru out there, we can't take any unnecessary risks. Come up to the bridge while we perform the scans. Your familiarity with the planet should tell us if anything is out of place." She hated to admit it, but he was right. They couldn't just blindly land on the surface without knowing what was down there. And if the planetary governments were keeping quiet, it meant something was wrong. When they reached the bridge, Evie was surprised to see Commander Graydon in the first officer's seat. Cas caught her eye and shrugged. "I needed a new XO, and my first choice didn't want the job." He nodded to Captain Geisen, who had taken the bridge engineering station. "Captain?" Evie asked. "Just the commander," Geisen said, smiling. "Captain was never an official title. They just gave it to me so they'd have someone to complain to. I'm more comfortable out of the spotlight." "Have you finished taking scans of the planet?" Cas asked, taking the captain's chair. Evie had to admit it looked good on him. "Bringing them up now," Zal replied. The main screen showed a full map of the planet, rotating slowly, with each of the major city centers highlighted. "Zoom in on the western continent," Evie said, taking a few steps closer. "Northern quadrant." The image magnified, so an overhead view of the continent took up the entire screen. As far as she could tell, everything looked normal. All the cities were where they were supposed to be, and she didn't see any destruction on the surface. "It looks fine." "Can you zoom in on Lakal? It's one of the smaller towns on the outskirts of Hilachi." Zal operated his controls until the streets of Lakal were clearly visible. It was a desert town, but some of the homes still managed to have blue-green grass, common on Sisk. Evie's eyes went to her childhood home. And though she couldn't see the house itself, she did see a dark spot on the map that corresponded with where the house should be. "Saul," she said, trying to keep the waver out of her voice, "can you focus in on this spot?" She tapped the screen, showing the same image which sat behind the specialist station. One moment. It zoomed in even closer. As the image cleared, Evie could see there was little left of the house. It had been burned to the ground. "I don't understand," she said. "I sold that house to a nice young Locula couple when I had to send Dad to Sypaxia. What could have happened?" She grabbed the orb inside her pocket. It seemed to pulsate in her grip. "I don't know," Cas said, "but we need to find out." He turned to her. "Care to take a trip?" She stared at the image on the screen. For whatever reason, the key to her past was down on that planet, and she was determined to find out what it was. "I'm ready when you are," she replied. Fortune favored the bold. This has been Broken Links, Infinity's End, Book 7, by Eric Warren. Narrated by Larry Gorman. Copyright 2019 by Eric Warren. Production copyright 2020 by Eric Warren.